This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen begins today's show discussing intentionally defective grantor trust and what they mean for farmers and ranchers. Continuing the show is DeWayne Craghead, agriculture and 4-H extension agent for Hodgeman County, as he explains agriculture in his area. The Beef Cattle Institute's Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster are joined by Jordan Thomas on their recent Cattle Chat podcast to chat about reaching reproductive goals in the herd. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show discussing intentionally defective grantor trusts with K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
No, thanks for having me.
Roger, what is the intentionally defective grantor trust?
Well, it's one form of an irrevocable trust that we use as an estate planning tool to try to keep assets out of a decedent's estate at death, and also simultaneously, if we're working on a transition of a farm or a ranch to the next generation, help that appreciation and value of those trust assets in the hands of those subsequent generations, in the hands of the beneficiaries. So we're trying to do two things with it.
Has there been a slight change or maybe taking that tool out of the estate planning toolbox?
Yeah, IRS has issued what's known as a chief counsel advice. It's a ruling on a particular request, in this instance from an IRS examining agent in the field looking at a return, wondering what position should we take on this. And the national office came back. And let me just explain what the reason for that ruling is. We use an IDGT. It's called an intentionally defective grantor trust. Now, some might say, well, why would I want a defective trust? Well, hang with me here for a second. It's effective for federal estate and gift tax purposes, meaning it's an irrevocable transfer of the assets, primarily the farm and ranch land, but it could be all the farm assets, into the trust. So it's irrevocable. And normally, under the rules, once we transfer that property away, we offset the value of that with exclusion, because that's a taxable gift away from us, and we keep it out of the estate at death. Now, the idea is that's appreciating property that's going into the trust, and so that future appreciation is not going to be subject to estate tax in the grantor's estate at the time of death. But the trust is defective for income tax purposes. Now, if this is a grantor trust, normally a grantor trust is different from a non-grantor trust in that the grantor is still treated as the taxpayer on the income generated by the trust. But here we have an irrevocable trust transferring the property away. Normally, the grantor would not pay the tax on this, but this is a special type of grantor trust. It's defective for income tax purposes, meaning that the grantor still is going to pay the tax on the income generated by the assets transferred to the trust, even though they're out of their eventual estate, even though they don't own those assets anymore. And what the technique has been in the past, some people will say, well, what if I don't have enough money to pay the tax obligation on the income? Because this might be, for example, farm and ranch land that's in there that's producing rental income, might be other assets that's producing income. And if the grantor has to pay the tax on that, but yet they don't own the assets, so their concern might be, what happens if I come up short? So practitioners will draft clauses into these trusts that say, well, we can borrow money from the trust and give an independent trustee discretion to distribute funds. It's not necessarily borrow. You're going to get money out of your trust, distribute the funds from the trust back to the grantor to make those tax payments. It's a tax reimbursement clause. And IRS said in 2016, all right, that won't trigger any gift or income tax consequences for the grantor. But now they've changed their position. Now they're saying that that type of tax reimbursement clause does trigger gift tax when the trustee distributes trust funds to the grantor to pay the income tax generated by the income that the assets produce in the trust. So that's not just an administrative issue. That's a change in beneficial interest, according to IRS.
Does this have a big impact on all levels of farming then, or agricultural estate planning, or just usually the really big ones?
Well, this would be a technique that's used for the large estates, and those where you've got a potential estate tax problem and highly appreciating assets. So one of the things with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is it keeps the exemption pretty high. It's going to keep it at $15 million. It's going to go up from $13.99 this year to $15 million per person next year. So for a married couple, that's $30 million in total wealth over both of their estates that escapes taxation at death, escapes federal estate tax. Now, that amount's going to be indexed for inflation starting in 2027. So this is a technique that we would use in large estates where the family is also wanting to transition that farm and ranch land to subsequent generations, to the next generation, and then keep it in the family for subsequent generations. So we want to keep the appreciation out of the senior members of the family's estates, and we do that by having them pay the income tax on this. And it's an irrevocable transfer into the trust, so there's nothing there, if it's drafted correctly, to be taxed in the estate of the older generation at death. So it's got twin purposes, but not everybody's going to want to do this, just the very large estates. And had the OBA not been passed, that federal estate tax exemption would have gone to roughly $7 million next year. And that would have caught a lot of farming and ranching operations. And so this technique would have been much more popular.
If operations or families have had this set up for multiple years and have been using it, are they going to need to change?
Well, that's a real good question. And that's a question that I've had to answer numerous times now. And what I point out to people is this is an IRS administrative ruling. It's a chief counsel advice. This is not a federal court saying this. This is not the tax court saying this. But what it does is it gives us a window where we can look to see inside the IRS what their position is on this issue. And they're just kind of shooting up a warning flare saying, no, we think this triggers gift tax, and you better plan accordingly for this. So you might have to modify existing intentionally defective grantor trusts that have agricultural real estate in it and change the tax reimbursement clause in a manner that won't cause the IRS grief in accordance with their new position. I'm not sure you can do that. I don't know if you can turn off grantor trust status or not. Maybe you can, maybe you're not. Maybe you can't. But boy, I tell you, particularly in certain parts of Kansas, if we've got mineral rights, we've got oil and gas rights, that income generated by that land that's in the trust, where you have that associated income coming from those natural resource rights, can be a big deal. And some might say that the IRS has essentially foreclosed the ability to retroactively implement any type of relief here. So we're just going to have to see. My guess is if the new Treasury, what I mean is the new administration and their Treasury, doesn't change position on this, it's going to have to probably be sorted out in court.
Roger, we've recently talked a lot about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and estate planning. So going forward, do you see any other big changes coming our way?
Probably not for a while. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act does make its provisions with respect to estate tax permanent. So we don't have a sunset on that. Now, of course, permanent in congressional lingo means until the next time that the Congress changes the law. But it will take an act of Congress to change, for example, the exemption levels or the rate of tax, because what OBA did was simply take the TCJA provisions and make them permanent. So we've got a permanent basic exclusion. We've got the increased exemption amount. We have an inflation adjustment, as I mentioned. So that's taken the urgency for a lot of farm and ranch families to make gifts before the end of 2025 off the table. We don't need to do that as part of an estate plan to minimize federal estate tax for most people. Now, if you're up above 15 million or you're up above 30 million for a couple, and this is net worth, then of course gifting is in the cards for you, but that's a very small percentage of people.
Roger, you mentioned gifting. Is there some more information when it comes to lifetime gifting?
Well, we want to think about whether the gifting strategy works in a particular state. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act does not negate the continued wisdom of lifetime gifting for some people. And gifting high growth assets such as farm and ranch land or valuable mineral rights that's often associated with that land would still remove all future appreciation from the taxable estate. And that gives you pretty powerful planning leverage over multiple generations. And so if you're trying to keep assets in the family for multiple generations and you've got high growth assets, then you want to think about gifting. Now, again, if we're close to that exemption level, which is going to be $15 million next year, then yes, gifting is in the cards for you. But this increased permanent nature of the exemption does give us a larger buffer against potential valuation audit adjustments by IRS, which is a frequent risk for non-liquid, closely held agricultural businesses. So that risk has gone down, and that's one good thing about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act for farmers and ranchers on the estate tax side of things.
Is it fair to say then that there are still plenty of tools in our estate planning toolbox?
Yeah, there are. We've got lots of tools, and we have more tools to the extent that the farming and ranching operation doesn't have debt. If we have to deal with debt, then that eliminates some of the tools that we can do or that we can utilize to move property from one generation to the next. But if we have an operation that has little to no debt, then we've got a lot of flexibility and a lot of options in terms of what we can do for those farm and ranch families.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. If you'd like to check out other work from Roger, you can do so by going to AgManager.info or by going to his website, www.washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. I will link both of these web addresses in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking with an agriculture and 4-H extension agent from Hodgeman County, DeWayne Craghead. DeWayne, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
DeWayne, currently in Manhattan, Kansas for the annual Extension Conference. And as we talk about agriculture and 4-H in your area, what agriculture is in your area?
We have wheat, corn, sorghum is the main crops. We do have a few soybeans grown under irrigation. In our county, we don't have much irrigation, about 15 to 20,000 acres, depending on the year. We're about half pasture, so we do have a lot of animals. We have a lot of cattle. We've had a few goats and a few sheep, and so that's part of our mix. And in the past probably 15, 20 years, we've switched over from being mainly stalker cattle to more of a cow-calf stalker mix now.
Why did you see that switch, or were there contributing factors to push that switch?
I'm not really sure. I guess people thought it was more stable, maybe, and the swings aren't as much in a cow-calf area as far if you can get started in it and can make the original payments, then you can be a little steadier income, and I guess that's why they switched.
And wanting to chat about those different crops you mentioned, wheat, corn, sorghum being the major ones in your county, and how is wheat planting going for this year?
Well, with all the rains that we had, it was delayed a little bit, but as of this last week, I'm saying we're probably 85 to 90% through. So we're making headway on that. The corn is getting harvested. We don't have a lot of corn. A lot of corn silage was put up when it could be. The rain delayed some of that I'm sure that switched over from silage to grain corn. And so that's started. We have a little bit of milo just starting to come in, so we're working at the harvest side of it.
Have the crops been looking like they're doing well for you guys?
The crops for this year have done pretty well. At first in April, it didn't look like the wheat was going to be of anything, and then we got quite a bit of rain and cool weather in May, and we had wheat that was zeroed out, and we had wheat that made 65, 70 bushels, so we had the whole spectrum. And as far as our milo, it looks like a bumper crop. Same way with the corn. we'll just have to see. Some of the dryland corn didn't get planted because it was so dry at first, and then that did has done really well. So,
DeWayne, you've mentioned rain and moisture a few times, and so has your county been one that's been a little more wet than usual?
Well, in the past 3 years, we've been in a drought, a pretty severe drought, and we were just looking at trying to get enough moisture to make whatever we could get. And last year, our wheat didn't do too bad because we got hand-to-mouth rains. I mean, they came at timely times, and again, some fields didn't get that, and they looked really bad, and some fields did. And so, but overall, this is the first year we've had much rain at all, and it stayed consistent over the summer. I know they like to say we're out of the drought, but we only have about 2.5 foot of subsoil moisture, and for us, 4 foot's kind of normal. That's when I consider us out of a drought. So my reckoning is we're still not out of the drought yet.
Coming into your 35th year with Extension, how have you seen agriculture change in Hodgeman County?
Well, as I mentioned before, we've switched a lot from stockers to cow-calf, and we have a mix. There's a few younger ones coming in. It kind of cycles. We get a few years where no one younger comes back, and then we have a bunch of younger ones come in, and that's what we're having now. Of course, a lot of our farmers, when you take out a few that's come back in, are 70, 75, 80 years old, so we need to have some new blood coming back. And one of the other things that's changed, just the equipment. You know, I've got tractors from 60s on my farm, and you know, when you get on a new tractor, there's so many bells and whistles, you can't even hardly figure out how to start them, so if you're not used to them. So that's one of the big changes. Of course, the GPS and all that, the technology has really moved in agriculture probably as much as anything.
As you've seen that technology move, do you see the younger population being the one to bring it in, or the older generations adapting and moving on forward with it?
Well, the younger ones are making the push for it. The older ones have to approve a lot of it because they're in charge of the purse strings, but if they want their youth to come back, they're going to have to pursue that because it does make certain things easier. So from that aspect, it makes farming easier, and so they're learning to adapt to that.
DeWayne, also a 4-H agent for Hodgeman County, and how have you seen 4-H and how it's being involved in the community change over your years?
Well, from the start, I'm a homegrown 4-H'er, so I was in 4-H many, many years ago, and at that time we had around 600 kids in the county, and we probably had 125 at the peak in 4-H, so we had a pretty good number. When I started back 35 years ago, we were down to 58 kids and in 4-H, and we brought it back up. We got up over 105, but mainly it was because my generation, a lot of the youth stuck around, and all of us had kids, and our kids were in 4-H, and then we had a period there again where we didn't have many stick around, and our numbers got down to as low as 28, and again it cycled around, and our grandkids are coming through, and so that's kind of neat to watch those cycles. But we're up to right around 60, and we only have 300 kids in the county. So from that amount, our percentages are great. We just don't have numbers.
What have been some of the recent favorite projects you've seen from your 4-H'ers?
Well, each 4-H'er has a different perspective on some things. One of our big ones is photography. It is pretty easy to do, and with cell phones, I know the judges don't always like to have the cell phone pictures being judged, but with some of these new cameras, they're better than a lot of the cameras you can buy. So we have a lot of those. Of course, animals are always a popular project. Our goats in our county haven't grown as much as in some other counties. Our swine project has went down some compared to what it used to be. Our beef project's made kind of a comeback. So we're kind of bouncing around. Of course, we have the rabbits and the chickens and ducks and those few things. And the static programs have really grown, though. We have more total numbers this year than we've ever had as far as projects shown. We had a lot more entered that didn't show, but they always want to make sure they get enough entered. But so we do that, and so the projects are growing. They're stretching out, arts and crafts, foods. It's just kind kind of a well-rounded mix, probably more so than when I was in 4-H.
So as we're thinking about people who are 4-H age and maybe their parents or grandparents, why would you encourage them to look into 4-H as being an opportunity for them to grow?
One of the biggest things is learning how to talk. Some of us are naturally introverts, and that's me, but over the years I've learned how to get out and talk, and my 4-H really helped develop that. I can remember when my daughter, her first time giving a project talk, my youngest daughter, she stood there and cried just before. She got up and cried as she was doing it, but when she got done, she's a really good speaker in front of people now. So that's one of the biggest things, the camaraderie that you have with the other 4-Hers. They're lifelong friends, and the accomplishments that you make give you that confidence, that self-confidence to go forward in life.
As we circle back to thinking about our farmers and ranchers, how do you feel like they're feeling or doing in your county?
Well, they're with the harvests that we've had with droughts, they're obviously financially a little stressed sometimes. The government shutdown is affecting CRP payments. Doesn't seem to be affecting much else in our county, but we do rely on government payments as the state as a whole does. I think it was in a meeting yesterday, and I think they said in the last 4 or 5 years we've averaged $42,000 from the federal government to help make the net earnings roll. So that is something that we're feeling right now, but there's an excitement in the air with all the moisture that we've had, and they're getting wheat in the ground, and they're harvesting some good crops right now. So,
DeWayne, do you have some programming that you usually hold in Hodgeman County if they're interested in coming to learn?
One of the things we do is we have an annual sheep and goat conference that we hold in either January and February. This year I think it's January 21st, I think it is. I don't have it right in front of me, but we have people from all over the state come. We've had people from Nebraska. We usually have a speaker from Colorado. We've had them from Oklahoma. So we do have a well-planned meeting, so if you want to learn something. Also, one of the things we do, there's 4 agents of us that are certified as ATV certified trainers. So we do host meetings around the state. 3 of us are in the west and 1 in the east, so we'd like to get a few more people certified so we don't do quite as much traveling. But it's a really good program, and for adults and youth, but we really focus on the youth.
If people have any questions or interested in any of this programming, is there a good way to figure out more information?
Just look on our website. We're working on that, so you can find out more on that. We'll have it posted, and we'll also, as far as the state, we try and have meetings posted for the sheep and goat on K-State's Research and Extension Small Ruminant face page book. So,
DeWayne, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
That was Agriculture and 4-H Extension Agent for Hodgeman County, DeWayne Craghead. I will link his county's extension page in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. I'm Madeline Drake, in for Shelby Varner. And we wrap up our Wednesday show with K-State's Brad White, Bob Larson, Phillip Lancaster, and guest Jordan Thomas on the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast.
Synchronization programs, and we've really got 3 main drugs that we use. So a progestin, a prostaglandin, and a gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH. But luckily, in the hands of repro guys, we've come up with about 179 different ways that we can apply those 3 drugs. I'm ballparking, it may be more than that. But we apply them in different ways, and we do different things with the goal of improving that conception rate. And Jordan, you've done some work in this area. Tell us a little bit about what's new and what you've seen as far as administering.
One thing that we've learned is, hey, in addition to maybe identifying specific cows that I want to use sex semen in because of their performance history or pedigree or age or whatever reason it may be, another great thing to do is just to limit the use of sex semen to only those cows that actually express estrus before the time of fixed tummy eye. So one approach that we started to think about a few years ago is, well, if we know that estrus expression prior to fixed time AI makes such a big difference, how do you build a protocol that really generates a really high proportion of cows expressing estrus before this time of fixed time AI? And so we just sort of started to hone in on, is there a simple one extra step approach that we could take that would really do that and get that synchrony of the estrus expression tightened down?
I've been intrigued with, some of the newer protocols that have come out. And, a lot of them use, 14 days of progestogen exposure instead of just 7. And so I think what you're really aiming at, Jordan, and it was getting a whole system. It's not really just a synchronization protocol, or it's not just the decision to use sex semen or not. It is a whole system where you've kind of identified the cows that are good candidates. And then among those cows that are good candidates, the ones that respond the best. But if you really hone in on the ones that are the best bets, it starts to be, yes, I've increased kind of my management, my decision making, but maybe my success is a little more palatable.
Let's say we've been AIing cows for a while. Are there certain cows that respond to a protocol better than others, even though let's say almost all the other factors are the same? Is there a way I can keep track of records and know that, okay, this set of cows seem to always get bred to my first service AI, whereas some of my other cows don't? Are there those cows in the herd?
When I think about the things that really get cows bred up early, the number one thing is, when did she calve last year? Yeah. So when did she calve in the previous calving season? Because when she calved in this previous calving season, early, well, now she's got, start to do the math, she's got 80 to 90 days postpartum before I start trying to breed her this year, right? And if she calves later than that, well, she's got 20, 30, something like that. It's much shorter. That's the number one driver of does she or does she not conceive back. It's just, when did I set her up to calve last year? And so that means long breeding seasons cause long calving seasons, and then require long breeding seasons and cause long calving seasons, and then require long breeding seasons. And you get the point. It's a vicious cycle. So controlling the length of that calving season, number one, probably by going in and doing a pregnancy diagnosis early enough that you can selectively market some cows that conceived up too late and keep that calving season tightened down that way. That's probably our number one ticket to identify those cows that, we're going to have good success in. And then the second biggest thing in that bucket, or second biggest bucket, you might say, is body condition score of the cows. If I've got cows in decent body condition score, meaning, 5.5, 6 range, those cows are going to do exceptional in AI programs in all of our data sets. And when we're under that, when we're particularly below 5, those cows really struggle. And so if I can control those two things, I don't necessarily worry that much about trying to create little groups of cows on paper. I think I just try to control those big sources of variation, which is, timing of calving, body condition score. If I can control those two things, I'm doing pretty good.
Once again, that was part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with guest Jordan Thomas and hosts Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.